Hello, thank you very much. First announcement, I have a different version of the same clicker. This doesn't work either. So, sorry, I have to stand around here. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Something works, okay. Okay, maybe just one more time. Okay. So my name is Benedek Gagyi. This is not my Twitter handle because I don't have a Twitter. Yeah, I know, practically I don't exist online. Sorry for that. But you can find me after the talk outside, so that's a way to solve the problem. I work for, yeah, I'll give that up, sorry. I work for Shopify in the payment team. And like Diana said, an important thing to know about me is that I really, really love tea. Like, I drink all kinds of tea, prepared in a lot of different ways. But my favorite way of preparing tea is called Gong Fu tea brewing. So probably most of you, when you prepare tea, you grab a bunch of leaves, put it into a teapot or a mug, pour some water over it, then wait like 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then drink it. And yeah, that's a really good way of enjoying it. That kind of tea preparation method is called the Western tea brewing. And there are a few differences between Gong Fu and Western. So the first major one is that in Gong Fu tea brewing, you use a much smaller teapot, and you put more leaves into there. And then you pour some water over it, wait much less time, so like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. For some teas, 1 minute, but not more than that. Then you pour the tea out, taste it, enjoy it, and then you repeat the process. So with Gong Fu tea brewing, you can do multiple steepings. For some teas, like 6, 8, 10, maybe 12. And the point I'm trying to make is that in Gong Fu tea brewing, it's a process. It's not just like one event. You do a steeping, you taste it, it's good, but there's something I don't like. You modify something, and you try it again. And there are actually 3 things that you can modify. You have 3 variables or levers that you can pull on. You can change the leaves to water ratio. Basically, you can take out some leaves or add some more water or something like that. You can change the water temperature, and you can change the steeping time. And basically, a Gong Fu tea session is just a process where you're trying to find just the right balance between these 3 things. So you do a steeping, modify something, try again. It's a really nice thing. I can highly recommend it. And I know right now it might feel a bit forced, the comparison I'm going to make. But basically, this is what I'm going to talk about, just with talk about how software is made and the variables being different professions or approaches to building software. Before we get started, I'm going to paraphrase Josh. What I'm going to say is going to be mostly an overgeneralization. I know I'm going to miss on some nuances, but my point is to spark discussion. And in half an hour, obviously, there's not really time to go into all the little details. So yeah, if you don't agree with me, that's perfect. If I made you think about the problem, I'll be really happy. Cool, finally, we can get started. So how is software made? Really easy question. It only has one answer, right? Of course not. But there's one answer I'm going to give. So basically, software is made by 3 different specializations working together. So there are the devs whose responsibility is to deliver features. And they deliver features by paying attention to stuff like performance, accessibility, quality, CEO, so all those kind of things. And then there are the UX people who are responsible for the UX design. And they achieve or create the UX design by going through user research, creating user flows, thinking about the look and feel, and a bunch of other things. And then there's the security people who are responsible for security, and they kind of achieve that by paying attention to AppSec, DevSecOps, doing audits, and a bunch of other things. So basically, these 3 specializations, they all work together towards one common goal, to deliver a really, really good user experience. And I know it's a bit overloaded term. This is user experience with all capital letters. So by UX, I mean the smaller thing, which is more about the design, and user experience in this talk is the whole thing, like all the emotions, everything that the user experiences when it interacts with your work. Okay, cool. So this is how it works. They all work together to create this. But how do they work together? Basically, probably in a team where you're working, as a developer, you're talking to the UX designers, you might be talking to the security people. But my question is, do those other two talk to each other? It seems to me in practice, and again, I know this is probably an overgeneralization, but it feels like there's a wall between them. And you might say, yeah, that's not a problem. We can silo these two because they don't really have effect on each other. That's not my experience. In my experience, security people might do things that results in broken UX, and UX designers might do things that might result in broken security. And it doesn't matter if the UX is broken or the security is broken. The end result is that the user experience is broken. And as a developer, as part of this team, I don't want that. Cool. So if you don't believe me that this can happen, I'll give you a few examples. So let's start with the first one, where security people might break user experience. So passwords. Passwords are a mess. I think this is kind of like not a new thing nowadays. And I'll even rephrase it a bit. The experience of passwords is a mess. And I'm going to give you 3 really short examples. So the first one, OK, you want to register to a new site, and you have to come up with a password. OK, and it says that please choose a really strong password. Cool. What is a strong password? I typed this into Google, opened the first 3 pages, and they gave me wildly different results. Like the first one says that it has to be at least 8 characters, and you should use like capital letters and special characters. The second one said it has to have 12 characters, but you should use like emoticons. Like, of course, why not? The third one said it has to have at least 16 characters. It needs to have passphrases. Yeah, OK, I can kind of understand. But it needs to use lead encoding, like encode some letters with numbers. Like, cool, but which one is it? Like, and I really have a practical experience with this. So I used to work for a password manager application in the security team. And we wanted to build a little feature where we would show exactly how strong your passwords are. And actually, there's no real answer to that. Like, we can kind of feel that this is not a really good password, and we know that this is a pretty good password, but like putting a really precise gauge, it's just not possible. So what do security people do? They put these really random and diverse needs towards the users, who then have to jump through these hoops, which is super inconvenient. So you're going to choose the simplest one you can, which will be probably pretty easy to break. So basically, by setting the standards random and higher, we actually made the UX worse and made the security worse, because at the end of the day, the user will choose something really bad. And I see some of you are smiling super smugly in the crowd, like, yeah, I use the password manager, and it has like an auto-generate feature, so it's not a problem for me. It's actually a problem for you too, because the expectations are so different that often, at least for me, I find myself going into the password manager and having to change the settings that, oh no, this generated password is not good because it doesn't have something. So you change the settings, go back, oh, there's another error, go back, and you end up saving the wrong password, and it's just a mess. It's still a really bad experience. OK, you finally have a password. Thank you. Cool. Now, how do you introduce that password? Well, whatever you do, you're going to see stars. So you know those little dots that you see instead of passwords? Yeah, they made sense 20 years ago when one library had one single computer, and you had to like pay attention that nobody else sees your password while you're logging into MySpace. Yeah, it made sense. But nowadays, when most people are logging in from their phones, where it's really hard to type correctly already, the fact that I can't see what I'm typing is super bad. It's annoying. You're going to mistype it. So what do people do? They choose a simpler password, something simple to type. You know what's hard to type? Special characters, capital letters, numbers, exactly the same things. So basically, again, the security people doing security try to defend the user from like a very obscure scenario, and by doing that, made the UX worse, and again, ended up hurting not just the user experience, but the security too, because you're going to choose a really simple password. And again, the smug password manager people are smiling that, I have autofill. But do you? Actually, most password managers don't really have an autofill. You have to do an extra click. It's turned off by default. And there's a security reason for that, because what if the page that you're visiting was attacked and it's actually controlled by a malicious actor, and then if I go there, my password is immediately introduced and I don't have control of it? Yeah, this is a scenario that could happen. I'm not saying it can't, but it has a pretty low percentage of happening. And to be honest, if a page is controlled that much by a malicious actor, that autofill doesn't really matter. You're probably going to lose your password anyway. So yeah, even with the password manager, entering the password is inconvenient. So what I was trying to say with these examples is that if good security has a bad user experience, then your app is not secure. Even if you think that the security part is good, but if it's not working together with the UX, it's not worth anything. Cool. Let's look at the other way around when UX people break security. So in general, user education is really hard. The problem is that user miseducation, on the other hand, is really easy. So for you to be able to, you might be familiar with this, but let me make a really small break. I work in payments, so I'm really into these things. And let me talk to you about 3D Secure. So 3D Secure is an extra security measure to make payments more secure. I'm sure you're familiar with it if you actually buy stuff online. It's basically an extra check. So you go to a page, they collect your card info, and then you're redirected to the provider's page, probably your bank's page, where you have to do some extra security check. You probably get a push notification or something like that. And if you complete that successfully, you go back to the shop and everything is done. Cool. So when this was introduced, a lot of people didn't have their bank's applications downloaded yet. So the UX designers know about it, so they were like, we need to check if they are actually who are saying they are. So what we could do, what if we ask them for their bank's password, their online bank's password? That sounds like a good idea. It's right there. So basically, we taught them that, hey, if you're randomly navigated away to a page that you've never seen ever in your life, you should enter your bank password. What could go wrong? It's like 10 years of anti-phishing training down the toilets. And yeah, this was the only way for some people to complete the transaction. They basically had to go against what they were taught. And then, just a really small minor detail, of course these pages looked like really badly. Like, they look like the worst phishing pages ever, and they still do often. Anyway, another way that security people might break, UX people might break security or cause security problems is by something called security through text. So the idea is that there are situations where there are hazards for the users, basically traps. And the best way to make sure that nobody falls into these traps is designing them away, like making sure that they are not present. It's not possible to do the bad thing. But sometimes that's hard to do, and it's much easier to just place a warning sign next to it and I'm done. It's the user's fault. So these are basically situations when you have a big red button that nobody should push, and you just slap a don't push notification over it and you're done. So this is obviously not good. And again, to just sum up this example, if you encourage bad habits, they will come back to haunt you. So I think most of you are developers here. Any UX designers or security specialists? Okay, not too many. So I guess most of you are developers, so you might ask, why should I care? Like, we're talking about UX designers and security, that's their problem. I'll try to make you empathize a bit more with these. So let's talk about developer experience, or DX. So what is DX? DX is basically the UX for the developers. So if somebody is working on Visual Studio Code, for example, the UX that they are designing becomes your developer experience. As a developer, that's what you're experiencing. And at the same time, DX is UX for users. There's been this debate going on over the internet. I'm not even going to get into it. Let's just accept that a good developer experience has a really good probability of transforming into good user experience. If it's easy to make the right product, there's a better chance that the right product will be built. So if we consider these two things, we can kind of go back to our original thoughts and switch out UX with DX. And the same thought process works, but now you as a developer, you're much more involved. So let's do a second round of examples when instead of UX problems or UX designers breaking security and security people breaking UX, we're talking about DX. So the first example, npm audit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this command. It's something designed for you to discover possible security vulnerabilities in your application. So it basically goes into package.js or package log file, goes through all of your third-party dependencies, and checks if there's a possible security vulnerability. The problem is that if you have a medium-sized application, you get like hundreds of errors. So what you're going to do? Fix all of them? Of course not. You're just going to ignore all of them. And that's a problem, like again, because the security focus was so much like, you have to know about this really tiny problem too. We basically broke the developer experience, and then nobody's going to act on it. Bad developer experience results in bad security and bad overall user experience with capital letters. Another similar example and a big pet peeve of mine is subtle crypto. So subtle crypto is a web API. It's like a low-level cryptography API that's really important to use because we were doing most of these things before subtle crypto through third-party libraries that were not too good to trust. But now this is API level, like browser level. Cool. The problem is that I don't know what committee designed it, but it's really, really hard to use. Like the API is so bad. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to do something super simple. It's so bad that if you go on the MTN site and search for subtle crypto, on the top of the page, you get this huge red warning that says that it's very easy to misuse them, and the pitfalls involved can be very subtle. So it's so bad. Also, quick side note, this is a really good example of security through text. Like, we didn't solve the problem, but we placed the warning sign. Our work here is done. Anyway, this is again a situation where it's a really powerful API, but they didn't pay attention to DX, and that resulted in making the user experience worse. Again, checking the other way around. Oh no, sorry, before we go in there. So earlier I said, if good security has bad UX, then your app is not secure. When we're talking about DX, basically we can say that if good security is hard to achieve, then your app will never be secure. So yeah, it's cool that you want to achieve good security, but it has to be easy to be realistic. Okay, checking the other way around. Is it possible that the DX is too good and that breaks security? Yeah, it is. Here's a little piece of code. It's in PHP, but it could be in any other language. What's happening here is we have a variable called offset that we get from a parameter, and then we make an SQL query where we put this in for the offset value. So I'm pretty sure that most of you realize that this is a huge SQL injection vulnerability that I'm showing to you. Why does this keep happening? Why is SQL injection still one of the biggest vulnerabilities on the internet? Because this is really easy to write. Like I want an SQL query, and this is the easiest way, most convenient way for me to write it. So of course I'm going to tend to use it and maybe forget about the security or think that I solved it, but it's actually not. So yeah, here the problem is that it's really easy to do the wrong thing. So if it's easier to write vulnerable code than secure, then you will never have an entirely secure application. Because yeah, developers and humans are always tending towards the easier way. Cool. So basically, as a developer, I'm wearing 3 different hats at the same time. I'm a developer. Mostly, I'm trying to build secure site, but I'm also a DX designer because every class I write, every function I make will be the developer experience of my colleague. When they open my code, if it's easy for them to understand, if it's easy for them to modify, then their DX will be good. If it's hard, then their DX will be bad, with all the ramifications we just talked about. So earlier I asked, why is this interesting for you? Because of this. You might not realize, but yeah, you work with UX designers and security people, but at the same time, you're also wearing this hat of DX designer and security developer. So it's really important to know how these things affect each other and that there's a relationship between all these things. So as a third round of examples, let's do something more positive. There are things where we can follow through how a really good experience was developed through the years, through a lot of work, through that balancing act that I talked about at the beginning. So the first one is the road to better login experiences. First, we had the credentials API. So this is an API in the browsers that basically makes the browser behave like a password manager. It can save your passwords and fill them for you. This is really good. It helps a lot with the UX. It's much easier to enter the passwords. And it's a good security measure because, yeah, it's still vulnerable to phishing and stuff, but at least there's a better chance of you not using the same password everywhere. And that's already a security update. Then the second API was added called Web OTP API. So the Web One-Time Password API makes it smoother to use two-factor authentication. Basically, you know that feeling when you're on your phone and you get the two-factor SMS and you have to switch to another app, copy the text, go back and paste it? Yeah, WebOTP basically solves this by making the whole thing much smoother. It basically auto-completes if everything is set up correctly. So this is not a security improvement, this is a UX improvement, but because it makes a security thing easier, two-factor authentication, it's basically a UX and security improvement. Then the third layer was added called WebAuthn, Web Authentication. This makes it possible for the browsers to use security keys, something like YubiKeys, for example, to make the authentication even more secure. And again, this is an extra layer of security. It's not a UX update necessarily, it's more like a security thing, but it opens the door for the one solution that is all above the others called passkeys, which is basically the holy grail of logging in, because using the passkeys possibilities, you can make passwordless logins a thing. So basically, you can register to a site and then use your fingerprint reader on your laptop or your Face ID on your phone to log in, and you don't even have to come up with a password. So as you can see, through iterations to find balancing, we got to a point where security and UX are both much better than when we started. Since I work in payments, I have to give a payments example too. So the road to better payment experiences was kind of similar. At the beginning, the credentials API was extended for the browsers to be able to handle credit cards too. So you can save your credit card data and it will get auto-filled. That's a pretty good UX improvement. You don't have to go and grab your card every time. And then 3D Secure was added, which is clearly makes the UX much worse, but it's a really important security measure because it basically makes every payment a two-factor payment, a two-factor authenticated payment. And then right now, a new thing is coming called Secure Payment Confirmation API, or SPC. This is basically a really complex thing. I don't really have the time to go into it, but the idea is that at the end of the day, you'll be able to make a payment by, you don't have to enter anything, you just authenticate yourself to the device that you're using, Face ID or fingerprint, and it handles everything. And it's much secure than the previous ones, much easier to use. It's really nice. Okay, we talked about positive examples. Now let's talk about solutions. So you're in a situation, you're a developer, you see that communication is not really happening, these negative effects are there in your team. So what can you do? Yeah, communication. I know it makes a lot of sense that communication is not happening, so you should communicate more. But how? First, you should spread awareness. So I find that it happens very often that developers know about a problem that's present for the UX designers or for the security people, but they don't pass it along because they don't think it's important. What I'm trying to say here is that this siloing of information is not a really good idea. So if you're aware of something, share it. Over-communication is always better than under-communication. The second thing is knowledge sharing. Maybe you learned about something new. Maybe you heard about secure payment confirmation now. Share it with your colleagues, share it with the UX designer, share it with the security people. Maybe they'll be like, oh my God, this is the thing that I was waiting for, let's implement it. And you solve a problem. So knowledge sharing is always good, and don't forget to include these other specializations too. And the third one is learn from the past. Like incident postmortems are always a really, really good way to make sure that we actually move forward when we did something wrong. And again, it's really important to include the other specializations too, because maybe they have an added context, maybe the fact that they know about what caused the issue will make them more capable of solving it in the future. Cool. A second thing that you should focus on is empathy. We talk a lot about UX, user experience, developer experience. Of course, you have to have a kind of empathy. You have to understand your user. And if you're designing an API, your user is another developer. If you're writing a class and you know that your more junior colleague will be working with it, you're creating their user experience, their developer experience. So maybe have that in mind. Don't use your fanciest JavaScript tricks if you know that somebody else who is not as fluent in JavaScript will be reading that code. The second is remove obstacles for others. I talked a lot about things being easy and things being hard. Yeah, if you remove obstacles, not just for yourself, but for other teams, maybe you see that in an area that you're working on, for you it's not a problem, but it's making somebody else's life harder. If you remove it, you're also going to reap the benefits of that. And the third one is just open up. Like, for others to understand your problems, first you have to be open about them, be willing to share it. I know it feels weird, because maybe if I was talking to a crowd somewhere in the West, maybe in the US, this maybe wouldn't be a thing. But here in Eastern Europe, we're not that proud when something is not working or we have problems. We're not really willing to share it. But actually, it helps you and the whole team in the long term. And the third one is focus on resiliency. So it's really good that it should be a goal to design security based on how people actually behave. Not how you want them to behave, but how they actually behave. Also, you should aim to remove the hazards entirely. We talked about this when we mentioned security through text. So a warning sign is not enough. And you should know that human attention is a finite resource. Even if you kind of know how they will behave, their attention is limited. So hoping that somebody will pay attention to your whole big security flow and remember 1 month later that you mentioned something somewhere, it's not realistic. By the way, these points were paraphrased from somebody called Kelly Shortridge. She's doing a much better job in explaining, focusing on resiliency than I do. So if these thoughts kind of, you like them or they ring a bell, go to that site. She's fantastic. Cool. And the last thing, the one thing that I want you to at least take home from this presentation is the paved road concept. I think if you think about this, it kind of solves a lot of issues, or at least it shows how you should solve a lot of issues. So the paved road concept is basically ensure that the easiest thing to do is the right thing to do. So if you think about it, it doesn't matter if you're working as a UX designer or a security expert or a developer or whatever. If this is what you're focusing on, the result will be probably better. And the last thing, don't forget that we're all in this together. It doesn't matter what your specialization, we're all working towards that one goal of our users having really good user experiences. So thank you all for staying with me at this late hour. I know that there's free beer outside, so thanks for your attention and see you outside.